Hey everybody, this is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. So in the past I've showed how to change the tires on your Vespa scooter. Well, I thought I'd show how to change the tires on your buddy scooter. So you may ask, what's wrong with these tires? They look like they have plenty of tread, and that's typical of a buddy, especially the front. It can last quite a long time. The problem with them is they're from 2008 and they're starting to show some signs of cracking, and I can just tell the rubber is really hard. I personally like to ride on tires that are less than 5 years old, but technically you're probably safe if they're 10 years or newer. So regardless of your tread depth, a scooter like this is a 2008, only has 3,000 miles, and we're gonna sell this through the store, Vespa Motorsport. Belongs to my good friend Gravy. He needs some money, but I thought I'd spiff it up with some Whitewalls. The Whitewalls, they don't really cost much more. They are a classic tread, which isn't sometimes the best handling tread, but they're good at displacing rain usually. These are the Shinko Whitewall tires, and the Scooter West part number is 35010 WWS-TL. These are the tubeless variant of this tire. On the buddy scooter, you can also put a 190 size tire instead of the classic 35010 tire. But 35010 is kind of reminiscent of the classic Vespa. I think they look great, especially on a customized scooter like this. That's all black with all that cool pinstriping. Might as well spiff up the look with these sweet Whitewalls for not all that much. And ignore that little piece of plastic. Those Whitewalls always come in the black bag. So the downside is you got to keep them clean, and even this act of touching will make them dirty. Set yourself up for success. Well, the tire might be rotten. Well, probably the stem. I see a lot of times 15-year-old, 10-year-old scooters, the stem is rotted, and that's where your leak is. And Scooter West web store for the genuine buddy stem is stem 90. They're really good quality stems made by Pacific, which is like the OEM manufacturer for all the Japanese makes. Really good stems. I'm sure this one looks not too bad, but let me stop talking. Let's get this wheel off and I'll show you how it's done. So you can find it's pretty useful if you do a lot of scooter service to have a scissor jack. We have these available, of course, on the Scooter West web store. Tool jack. I have it right under the battery tray, which is rather fragile on the buddy, but the buddy is a very lightweight scooter. I can actually lift this up with 2 fingers. It doesn't take much. But before we start lifting the front, I got 2 wrenches here. I got a 17 millimeter and a 14 millimeter, and we're gonna go ahead and loosen the front axle. So put 1 wrench on the one side and then your 17 millimeter, and just go ahead and loosen the axle nut. So if the wrench doesn't do the trick, you want to get a breaker bar or some type of impact wrench. You may want to grasp the scooter and pull up, or alternatively you could turn the wrench around and push down. And that's why I don't want to jack up the front just yet. So break that free. Probably shouldn't be this tight. Definitely shouldn't be that tight. Who knows if it was tightened that tight from the factory. Definitely has original tires on the front, but just to show you what you may encounter. And normally I'd use a electric impact, but kind of want to show you how it's done with hand tools. So I probably could have also cheated with a wrench. I'll show you a little trick with a wrench. So say if you need to extend a wrench, oftentimes you could take 2 wrenches and kind of nest them together just like that and make a longer wrench, you know. So that's one little tip if you're trying to cheat your way through a job. As you're spinning this axle out, spin it. It shouldn't be binding up or anything. One thing about the buddy scooter, they have pretty fragile forks, axles, and the wheels. So if you hit a really big pothole, it might have a bent axle. But this axle's going in and out freely. It spins really nice, so I don't think there's an issue. I'm not gonna pull that out just yet. Go ahead and lift the scooter. I don't even need to use the wrench, but the tire's right off the ground right here. And another thing is sometimes the caliper, you'll be struggling with it. Just spend a little extra time with your 12 millimeter wrench, take the caliper right off. It's a good opportunity to clean and further inspect the brake pads. These do have Loctite on both these screws, so you may want to have the blue Loctite, which is the medium strength Loctite. You can see it right there on the threads. And just go ahead and pull these both off. They're both the same length. They do have little dots on there, kind of from the factory, the torque spec dots. And you can get the caliper and just hang it right there. Those pads are perfect. They have plenty of life in there. The thickness, I'm not looking at the metal backplate, but the actual friction material, which has the little slots. And at this point, just go ahead and pull the axle out. I'm taking a little pressure off the wheel by lifting it up. And the scooter almost wants a lift. So as you turn the wheel on the right side, you're gonna see the speedometer drive, and it pulls right off. There are some internal parts that will fall out of it, and just set that aside. And at this point, you could lift the scooter a little bit and pull the wheel right out. Pretty simple. And you still have the jack under there to support it. We could take the air out of the stem by removing the Schrader valve that's inside the stem right here. Could do that, especially if you're going to reuse the stem. If you pull that out, sometimes the cap will have the tool to do it. But we know we're going to replace the stem. And I do see some cracks in it right there. It's the rubber stem. And one of the easier way to just get rid of it is just cut it out of the way. It's made out of rubber, so I'm very close to the wheel. And just take a big diagonal pliers and give it a cut. And it will just lose all the air. You could use a razor blade, does the same thing. And that didn't take much effort at all. You know, it's kind of a little bit rotted. So let all the air out. It doesn't really matter which side. You can see there's a rotation mark to these tires. A lot of times a Whitewall tire like this that's got a classic tread is unidirectional, so it's not really critical which way you install that wheel. The hard part though, I have showed how to change a tire with basic tools. The hardest part is going to be breaking the bead. So you could, obviously a tire machine's the way to do it in a workshop. I have shown how you could just run over this with something that's heavier, like a car. If you carefully run over the rubber bead, you could do it with a car. But sometimes with 2 tire irons, you can get enough leverage in there to break it free. Especially on these steel wheels, they're pretty easy to work with is what I find. So I'm just kind of working around. I'm using 1 tire iron. You definitely want to have 2. And check this out. Look at that. So you can see the bead is broken away. The thing I love about steel wheels, they're just real rugged when you use tire irons against them. Aluminum wheels, like found on the newer Buddy scooters and many other scooters, the Vespas, are much more fragile. So when you're using a tire iron against this edge, it tends to want to mar and chip up the edge. There is plastic protectors that you can put around to use with tire irons, but I don't know, sometimes just find somebody with a tire machine and do yourself the favor. So now that I got the bead, it's loose all the way around. It dropped into this little recess right here. Keep your hand with some pressure, and you can see the tire kind of pulls into that recess. And the reason I usually like working on the rotor side is you can use the rotor to your advantage to kind of hold the tire irons. So with 2 tire irons, you could work your way around. That's something I used to do with dirt bikes. I'd be out in the desert, have to change a tire, and don't have an extra hand, because my friends would always be looking at me, wanting them to change their tires when they had a flat out in the desert, and they wouldn't help. So I just always knew, well, you got to put the tire iron under the rotor or a sprocket on a motorcycle. And at this point, just keep on working, baby steps. See, I kind of took too much of a step, and you kind of fight it and you chip the rim a little bit. So just little baby steps. I'm kind of just doing it little steps at a time. And just work your way around. And it gets to a point where you don't even need 2 tire irons. It's almost all the way off. Make sure you don't jam into the rotor too tight, because it is, you could bend that rotor pretty easily if you get a little wild on it. And at this point, pretty close. You would have a lot more trouble breaking the bead if that rim was a little bit rusty. So you got 1/2 of the tire off. Go ahead and flip that tire over and pretty much repeat the whole process. But
we're just going to push the bead off back towards the disc and kind of just wedge those tire irons in and work our way around. So I'm kind of working one in there, just kind of lever it in there. Sometimes you can use your knee to your advantage to kind of hold the tire, and then just kind of do it. Get the tire iron in there and just keep on working around until it pops the bead into that recess. So there it is. So now the rim is separate from the tire. And at this point, this is a little more difficult. A lot of times you want to use a spoon end of your tire iron. So I'm basically digging the tire iron into there, going on the other side of the tire, and I'm lifting that bead of the tire. Let's see if you can get it. You can see I'm lifting the bead over the edge of the rim. A lot of it's just experience, of course, changing tires by hand. And, you know, I'm not struggling too much with this, but if you're doing it the first time, you may struggle with this quite a bit. And this is sometimes where it's even worth having 3 tire irons. You could, in a pinch, use a screwdriver and get that up into the in between there. And then we'll need to move the tire iron along just like that. But it's a little more difficult because you're using the spoon end of the tire iron, and you know, to pop it off the bead here, and we don't have the luxury of getting the tire iron underneath under the rotor on this direction here, especially on a small wheel like this. I'll tell you one thing, big wheels are easier. You know, like doing a big 17-inch, 18-inch wheel is just easier. You have more room to work with. These scooter tires actually are more difficult to change a tire. See how I like slipped out right there? So just try again. Get that spoon on the bead. If it slips off, you may just need to try another position. Again, so now that the tire is loose from the bead, with a small wheel like this, you may want to just get the tire iron in just like that. We're getting me in between the bead and the tire, and we're using the spoon end of the tire iron. So at this point, you're just kind of levering the tire over. You might want to, since I don't have the rotor to my advantage here, and sometimes you even need a 3rd tire iron, could be useful. You could just put a screwdriver in there to hold it if you don't have an extra tire iron. Definitely, it's going to be a pretty difficult job if you only have 1 tire iron, but 3 would be ideal. So kind of get the spoon. Again, just little baby steps. And I'm using my knee to kind of hold that other tire iron. And kind of once you get past the point, it's going to actually go really easy. And I'm moving this screwdriver over. And we'll probably do one more, and I bet you the tire is just going to come right off. And again, get the spoon in between. Not much room to work on with these little 10-inch tires here. And just like that. And at this point, that's the part of the stem. We don't really care about that part. At this point, we might be able to even slip the rim out of here. And if you had some soapy water already, it might be a good time to use that. At this point, you put your knees on the tire and just pull it right out. So yeah, it takes a little bit of effort, and it also takes a little bit of know-how of doing that, your experience of changing a tire with just basic tools. Believe me, I get spoiled with the tire machine. I haven't done that job in quite a long time. And you check the inside of the rim, it's really clean. It's never had another tire on it. Looks really good. You want to check it all the way around. And next we'll go ahead and get some soapy water. We'll go ahead and put a new stem in here. So we have the hole where the stem goes. I have a brand new stem. And you soon realize this stem, it might drop in just a little bit like that. The stem comes out the side that's opposite of the of the rotor. And ideally, you could either use a little dish soap or some soapy water just on the stem, the rubber itself. And typically, I have a fancy tool that will just pull these right in. This is a specialized tool for that. Two ways you can go about it. Sometimes you can get lucky with a Phillips screwdriver and push the stem through. These ones are usually harder, but if you are struggling with it, you can flip it this side, the disc side, and we'll very, very carefully with the diagonal pliers, because they happen to get in there and bite on the brass of the stem. And at that point, you carefully pull it in. So usually I'll lever against the wheel so I can get a little leverage, and I'm actually pulling the stem in, but not squeezing it so tight that I'm cutting the copper of the brass of the stem here. So, and sometimes it just takes a little bit of effort, and you'll be able to pull that stem into place. Sometimes I'll be able to push them in too, but I'll tell you, the fancy tool that I have really makes the job easy. So see how it's pulling in, kind of levering it in there. And it's almost all the way in there. So, and you can see it's almost just right there, right where it needs to be. Pull just a little bit more. And if you're at the regular soapy water doesn't do it, dish soap does it a little bit better. I just don't happen to have that on me right here. So there we go. It's pretty much all the way pulled in. There it is. So the stem is pulled in place. You can see it's pulled all the way in there. You can double check it sometimes with a screwdriver. Kind of rotate the screwdriver and push it. And you can kind of see how it's pulled in there and mushroomed onto that little stem there. So the next step, these white walls, you can get them really, really dirty pretty easily if you have greasy hands. Soapy water or dish soap on the bead. So both beads, kind of get it soaped up. Don't get too much inside the wheel. Don't really want moisture inside the tire, because that affects your tire pressure when it gets hot. And just like the removal, we'll kind of start with a tire iron. I'm using my knee kind of to help get leverage on there. And we're just working on one bead at first. I know it's kind of hard because you kind of have two beads in the way on the first one. So sometimes you could just get a big step of it pushed in just like that. And I usually want the stem away, because the stem will kind of get in the way of that recess. So let's try this again. So kind of push the tire in, the tire in there. Of course, a tire machine is a lot cleaner because I don't really have anything touching the wheel. And we'll get the flat parts of the tire iron and start working this in little baby steps. And there's also fancy little tools that will hold the bead. There's lots of ways. I'm sure there's plenty of other videos, but like I said, scooter tires tend to be the more difficult ones to do by hand. And at this point, see, I'm already starting to get the rim in there, so kind of keeping pressure on this. And this is a unidirectional tire, so like it didn't really matter which way it goes on. But we're getting pretty close here. At this point, you want to take smaller steps as scooping the tire on. So kind of inch that tire iron closer to the bead where it's folding over. I'm using the flat end of the tire iron, and there you go, popped right on. This is the easy side right here. So at this point, I like using my knee, get my knee right in there, just to hold it down, using my other hand to kind of help it along. I'm using the cup side of the tire iron, and I'm working the tire in there. So I'm getting the tire bead into this center little channel that's on the wheel. So that's the whole key to this whole job, is you'll never get the tire stretched onto the rim if you don't use that recess that's in the wheel to your advantage. So still has soapy water, and I'm taking care not to grind my tire irons onto outside of the rim. It's one thing doing it a little bit on the edge to get the leverage, and you can see it's getting harder. So at this point, I'm going to take smaller steps. You don't want to really hear the tire kind of crackle and, you know, as you're doing this, because it's not very good for the tire. And then the last couple steps. So, and there you go. So at this point, you probably want to have some compressed air. You may want to have a tie down to put around the perimeter of the tire to get the seat initially. So let's do that. So go ahead and pull the Schrader valve out. I just recommend doing this to begin with. Sometimes it is possible to get enough air in there initially, but usually you want to pull that out. I like to pull out anyways, then I could make sure it's tight when I reinstall it. You got an air blow gun, so you need compressed air. And keep your fingers out of the bead, but I'm putting pressure with my chest and makes 2 pops. Doesn't take much, but I was putting pressure on the outside perimeter of the rim. And at this point, go ahead and put the Schrader back in. So it threads back in with the little Schrader valve tool, something you find at a bicycle shop or auto parts store. Sometimes it's built into the cap of your valve stem. So the valve stem cap. Now I got my pressure gauge. We'll do about, for a little scooter like this, maybe 24, 25 is all you need. And there we go. And you can see I kind of made a dirty mess of the outside of the tire. We can go ahead and put this stem cap on. The nice clean straight rim, I don't really have any question that's going to leak. Just soapy water. You don't want to use anything too crazy. There is a product called bleach white if these white walls start getting yellowed. So you keep that in mind if you need to clean it with something a little stronger down the road. But they're brand new. I just want to get all my dirty grease prints off this and just use soapy water and some elbow grease and we'll get these nice and clean. So even the steel wheel here, so cool if I had black wheels, but could have sent them out for powder coat. But looks pretty cool with the white walls, nice classic look to it. So again, kind of just buff the soapy water is all you want to do. Clean the inside the rim. This perfect opportunity to clean the rim, the rotor, everything. Clean it really, really nice so it looks like perfect and brand new. Next thing you want to check is this little spacer right here. I notice they normally run these dry. It doesn't really seem to be a problem. If it squeaks a little bit, you can put a little grease on the spacer, just a small amount. Sometimes there's even grease on the inside of the speedometer drive. It doesn't need much. I'll just keep it from squeaking. It's just more or less a dust seal, and that goes back in place. So let's get back to the scooter. We'll pop this wheel on, and then I'll show you how to remove the rear wheel. I'm not going to show you how to mount another tire, though. That was a lot of work. I'm used to the tire machine. I'm a lazy guy these days. All right, so I got the scooter still jacked up. I got my axle ready, my brake calipers hanging. This is your speedometer drive. Make sure there's some grease in there. See it right there. There's these 2 little tabs. That's the critical mistake that a lot of people make when they put these together. The speedometer won't work, and it's because they damaged the speedometer drive when they assembled it. So I kind of like the wheel into place, almost there. Kind of just wants to hold in place, and it's pretty important to look at your speedometer drive. It's got 2 teeth inside, and they need to engage with the 2 slots on the wheel itself. So keep that in mind. And then there's also a little slot. Now I'm trying not to get my tire any dirtier than I already have it because I just cleaned it, but nothing stops me from cleaning it more. And we'll kind of rotate it. It may need a little more grease. And you'll know when it's engaged with the drive. It's kind of, it kind of keys in with it. And then we're going to go ahead and lift it in place. And it's kind of a combination of the spacer. Make sure you don't knock the scooter off your lift. And I'm holding the wheel. You may want to have somebody help you with this. Get the axle through. So And it's kind of a trick getting it through everything. So and these little 10-inch wheels, sometimes you even have to get the, if you have brand new brakes, sometimes you have to get the caliper on there. I'm just gonna put one screw just to hold it, because I do want to come back and put a little more Loctite on there just to be safe. So make sure it's spinning freely, and then go ahead and send the axle all the way through, and then it's engaged with the speedometer drive that's on your right side. So go and thread the nut on, and we'll get the 14 millimeter on there. And at this point, we can lower this, let the tire touch down, and just do it tight to the hand. You know, you do not need to really crank on it like it was initially. It needs to be tight though. And then we'll put a little bit of Loctite on both these threads for the brake caliper. So just a little bit of fresh Loctite on there. Doesn't need much. You can find small capsules of it. And we'll go back to this top one. And before we even ride off of the scooter, you want to pull the brake lever a few times, the front brake. So here we go. Tighten both those. And if you want to torque these with a torque wrench, about 15.5, 16 foot-pounds. And the Loctite's kind of going to do the trick. And that's how you do the front. So, all right, so on to the rear tire. In some ways it's easier in the front, some ways it's more difficult. So make sure your muffler is cold. Only have this running for a little bit. You need a 12 millimeter socket, a 10 millimeter socket extension. It's helpful to have a combination wrench. And then the almighty breaker bar with a 24 millimeter. I'll show you there's two ways to skin the cat on this scooter when it comes to removing the rear tire. But first of all, you got this little shroud, the little fender, and there's a little 10 millimeter. Sometimes it wants to spin the little bracket that's underneath, so you may need to get a little pliers or something under there. The reason you're doing this just so you can lift it away is it's tied to the muffler bracket. Next, we're gonna move on to the header. Can't really see what I'm doing, but just follow this pipe all the way to where it goes to the cylinder head. You're gonna find two nuts that look like acorns. Of course, do that when it's cold, because it's gonna be scalding hot if not. So go ahead and remove both fasteners. You can easily get access to these, not like some models where you need special swivels and such to get access. Definitely want to take these off. You can't really get the wheel by with leaving the muffler in place. Very difficult. And that's pretty much a trait with all scooters. They kind of have the muffler in place. And there's what those two acorn nuts look like, just like that. We do have those on the Scooter West web store if they're damaged or broken. These have very robust studs. So the way I like doing this is loosening all four fasteners. So there's a lower fastener on this muffler here. I mean to move the camera. And then one up here as well. This one's sometimes hard to get to, so you may want to put a combination wrench on there. And what we'll do is loosen the muffler. I start with this lower fastener of the muffler first. I think they're all the same screws if I recall. And then kind of lift the muffler. It's a perfect time to paint this muffler barbecue black. You can get that kind of paint at a home improvement store, even the auto parts store. You can really spiff up the look of your scooter just by putting a little paint job on the muffler, but you don't want to use regular spray paint. So I'm kind of lifting the muffler can as I'm loosening that last screw, because the muffler, all the way the muffler is just resting on that thread. So it pulls right away. Take a look at that gasket. It's in good shape. Usually you get several tries, we do have those available. If the mufflers come off 5 or 6 times, it may be a good idea to change it out. And here's the bracket. Last thing, got those all loose. I just like to have everything loose before we move forward. Go ahead and pull these screws out. Actually, these do have a slightly different washer than the ones on the muffler, but pretty much the same. Probably not gonna hurt if you swapped them, but I like to put everything back in the same spots when possible. And sometimes you can just keep yourself organized by leaving the fasteners in place, just like that, you know, so you come back to it. All right, this is where it comes the 2 ways to skin the cat. If you want the easy way, you could take these outer 12mm fasteners, they're usually pretty tight, and just take the steel wheel away from the brake drum. But here at Vespa Motorsport, my techs will always take the center nut off because they want to inspect the rear brakes on this scooter. So, of course, that's a very large nut right there, like a 16mm thread with a 24mm. And as you can see, the wheel rotates. Sometimes you could pull the rear brake. It's going to want to shift the whole scooter backwards. I'm going to get on top of it and try to do that. So this is where it's useful to put a zip tie around the brake. You might want to have your brakes adjusted. Get it really tight, but so you put a zip tie, you can put a little bungee cord, whatever you have around there, and that just makes it so you can do a one-handed operation. So at this point, I got my breaker bar all handy, and let's see if we can do this. And be careful, because the scooter will want to topple off the center stand. So see how the whole scooter's going down, the tire's making contact to the ground, and I was able to break it free. So you can do that with an impact wrench as well. Go ahead and remove this nut. It should have friction. If there's no friction as you're removing it, this little tab washer is worn out, and I would suggest getting a new nut. That's what keeps this nut from backing off. You don't put Loctite on it. Same with this washer, check the condition of it. It's still in really good shape. It's the first time it's ever come off probably since this scooter was manufactured, but don't really want to mess around with a wheel falling off. So if that nut, you have any question about it, you may want to just replace it. Go ahead and cut the zip tie. Don't need that again until we tighten it. So at this point, should be able to walk the wheel off and walk it straight off. If it still doesn't come off, you may want to loosen this adjuster right here for the brakes. So at this point, I'm going to clean it out with some brake cleaner. I'll clean the hub out with some soapy water, and guess what? I'm going to make it nice and easy. I'm going to have some magic happen over near the tire machine, and this wheel is going to instantly have a Whitewall on it. Boom! There's a new Whitewall, all installed nice and clean. And it took about 4 minutes instead of 15, 20 minutes. Do it with that tire machine. So up to you. You could take the wheels off, save yourself $1 versus going to your shop and take them to the shop and have them change the wheels. Like going rates like 20, 25 bucks to change a tire. Plus you got to pay whatever disposal fees that are associated with properly disposing of these little worn tires. So went ahead and threaded that on, cleaned the drum, I blew the brake dust off. I know the brakes are in really good shape. Do the zip tie trick, and we'll go and tighten this. If you have a torque wrench, you could torque it to about 80 foot-pounds. And make sure it's pretty tight. You'd probably go a little higher if you wanted to. It's a pretty robust fastener on there. I'm trying to actually look at this in a camera. I can't even see where I'm on the other side of the scooter. And something about that. Nice big long breaker bar. Allows you to get it pretty tight. And at this point, let's put the muffler on. You can adjust the rear brake as well. Ideally, you want to have the lever go in maybe 3/4 to an inch, before it starts engaging. You don't want to have it too tight because as it heats up, I'm actually adjusting that adjuster right there. So that's ideal. So at this point, those 2 fasteners are still in place on the bracket. Get right in there. Tires inflated to, I don't know what I have it, probably about 30, 32 PSI is ideal. They say 30 for the front, that's way too much for these little lightweight scooters. I like I like run them like 24 in the front, 22. You can run them down as low as 20, but you might ding the rim. So just keep that in mind. So with mufflers, always everything goes in a little bit loose. So everything's wiggles, and that's the way you want to start with a muffler. Otherwise, you know, with a crack header or other problems. So you got the muffler, and we'll just go ahead and pop that right back up in here. Of course, I'm in the way of the camera. That doesn't help. But go ahead and, as you're supporting this, start just getting fasteners started. That's all you want to do is get them started. So, and then back to the last fastener right here. Get that one in there. And again, sometimes you got to lift the muffler a little bit just to take the weight off the header and the muffler so you can get everything started. So just hand tight for everything. And then we'll go hand tight on this. And the first ones we want to torque are these header bolts that are located up here. So you kind of feel your way along the header, get that socket on there. And you want to go between the two, and then you can torque them all the way up to about 15 foot-pounds. And that would be plenty tight for these 8mm studs. These studs are pretty robust on these Buddy scooters. I never see problems with them. Yeah, something like a Yamaha Vino has 6mm studs and they break all the time. To a Vespa has a 7mm stud all the way up to the 250 size scooters. There are 300s, and sometimes those will break. But these Buddies, they came with 8mm studs and they are pretty robust. So at this point, can't really get fastener on there, so we'll just use the wrench and we'll tighten the two that go to the engine block. So just like that. Got to use the wrench there. Again, all about 15.5, 16 foot-pounds. And then the last two. And there you go. That's how you change a set of tires on a Buddy. Pretty straightforward for a scooter. There's some scooters that are a little more difficult to change, and this one's, I don't know, in my eyes, pretty easy. But, you know, obviously changing the tires on a tubeless rim are a little bit of work in their own. So, well, thanks for watching. This is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. If you're interested in a scooter, it's up for sale. It may be gone. You never know. I'm shooting this the 2nd of February, and just thought I'd share it with everybody. And I want to sell this and make sure it's 100% solid for whoever buys it. This scooter kind of means a lot to me. It belongs to a good friend of mine, and he has health problems. He's definitely not going to ever be able to ride it, unfortunately. So kind of want to help him out. Had some cool custom stuff on it, and I want to just add a couple more custom touches to the scooter and bring another 15 years of life out of it. It's a 2008. It's pretty much identical to a brand new Buddy 125. They never really changed them, and that's pretty good. These things are just rock solid, simple little scooters. So until next time, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. Look for all the other videos of doing service to the scooter and cleaning up and detailing it, cleaning the carburetor and such. See you on the next one.